Hi friends, Kris here. I'm so glad you're with us. We're adding new Prism partners every day, and I sure appreciate you tuning in every morning with me for 5-minute church. We're on Jonah, the inside story. You remember the storm came, and then he stood up and told the sailors, the only way this storm is going to be calmed for you is if you throw me overboard, man overboard. Well, they didn't do what Jonah said, and so in verse 13 of chapter 1, the sailors resisted God. Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to bring it to land. So I want to speak today on row your boat. You can keep rowing and rowing against the current and never get anywhere. And somebody says, life's so hard. Why is life so hard? Well, Jesus didn't say it's hard. He said, take my yoke upon me because my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So if everything in your life is hard, then there must be a reason for it. Let's try to find out why. Number one, you cannot appease God if you continue to oppose God. Jonah said, somebody's got to die. Somebody has to be surrendered. Throw me over the gangplank. Well, that's the doctrine of atonement. It means that one person dies so that the rest of the people can live. And yet the mariners wouldn't do that. So they kept rowing. They kept rowing. Now, Isaiah chapter 30 and verse 15, thus saith the Lord, in returning and rest shall you be saved. In quietness and in confidence shall be your strength. In other words, when you surrender to God, that's when peace comes. But listen, but you would not. But you said, no, for we will flee upon horses, and therefore you shall flee. How many times have you done just like that and resisted God and said no? Well, let me tell you, you can't appease God as long as you oppose God. Second, I want you to recognize the futility of utility. What do you mean by that? John 6 and 63 says the flesh profits nothing. You can row all you want till your arms turn to rubber, and that only leads to frustration and exasperation, and you're not getting anywhere. You have to be like Jonah and say, I've got to surrender to God. I've got to yield to the Holy Spirit if I'm going to have peace. There's another storm story. This is Mark 6, verse 48 in the New Living Translation. And Jesus saw that they were in serious trouble, rowing hard and struggling against the wind and waves. And it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. Imagine that. 3 a.m. and they're just row your boat trying to get ahead and not going anywhere because they're doing it in the flesh. The futility of utility. And you remember Saul of Tarsus, who later became Paul the Apostle. In Acts 9 and 5, the Lord said to him, it is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. And in Proverbs 13 and verse 15, the way of transgressors is hard. So if everything in your life is hard, you may need to be like Jonah and say, I surrender all. And then number 3, and this is a Robert Burns quote. He said, the best laid plans of mice and men go awry. Well, are you a man or are you a mouse? We think we're men, but really we're just mice if we're not walking in the Spirit. The Israelites went up against the little town of Ai presumptuously, didn't seek God, and they were smitten before their enemies. And when the Egyptians essayed to go through the Red Sea, they were drowned. Listen, it proved that they were just mice. You have to surrender to God and get His help. And I heard a sermon back in the 90s. I don't remember who preached it, but I still remember the title. It was kind of going around back in those days. Your arms are too short to box with God. Well, that's the futility of utility. You need to walk in the Spirit. And then number 4, when you do things God's way, it becomes amazingly calm. It's amazing. After they threw Jonah overboard and Jonah said, I surrender all, and the fish swallowed him up. Well, it says in Jonah 1 and verse 15 that the sea ceased from its raging. The rage stops when we yield to God. And Matthew 10:39 says that. It says, he that saves his life shall lose it, but he that loses his life for my sake shall find it. Galatians 2:20, I am crucified with Christ. In other words, if I surrender to God, then everything in my life becomes calm. It's not hard anymore. And let me close by saying that the book of Jonah and the life of Jesus have a lot in common. Jonah threw himself overboard and the ship was saved. Well, 2,000 years ago, a greater than Jonah, Jesus threw himself overboard to the will of God. He surrendered to the cross, and when he died, when he walked the gangplank, guess what? The whole ship, all the world, anybody that wants to can be saved. Thank God for the life of Jesus. I hope you're enjoying this series. Love to hear from you. Like if you like, share this with a friend, comment, tune in tomorrow as we learn more on Jonah, the inside story. We'll see you then.